Can Neo make an appearance, or would that just freak him out?
I tried.
Well,
Try. He's way over there.
I mean, you're saying you want to see Neo now or during the event?
Well, during the event is what I meant, but I mean,
Okay.
now would suffice too.
Can we see some chickens during the event?
I mean, you could, but it would be a little messy. Would you like
One
to see
chicken,
a chicken
one
poop on my
frog.
head?
Oh my God!
That's awesome.
Nice.
So are you just gonna change your background through the whole thing, like different things to kind of like surprise us?
I'm having way too much fun with this.
Has anybody made it possible to put video behind yourself? Like, could you have the little girls coming down the hall?
Probably,
behind-
yeah. They have video. You can add video.
Yeah.
Have them like riding by.
The first time I saw that was in that horror movie Host. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
I want to.
So now I'm kind of discouraged about the idea of doing it because the person is like on a loop behind them doing the same thing. So in theory, you could have yourself on a loop behind you doing various things in the background as you're also.
I mean, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I kind of would.
Yeah. I'm just doing the silliest stuff. Well, now I'm messed up. And now
Yeah,
I
you know you're with the right group because we all recognize that background.
Yeah.
Or the wrong group, one way or the other, yeah.
Okay, here it is. This is the background. Yay. Okay, I'm a villain.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Oh, wow.
That's a good one.
The funniest one I did was where they put us in Zoom and then they walked us over to the proprietary program we were going to be in where nothing worked.
Okay.
Oh.
It was a weird kind of ritualistic thing. Like they were so used to walking people over that they couldn't quite, not walk people over even virtually. It was very strange.
That is weird. Have you all done a lot of events? A lot of online events?
Not until the last couple weeks, and then
Okay.
suddenly.
I've attended
Okay.
quite a few.
I had some back in the spring because they were converted events that were supposed to be, me there.
Okay,
And then
right.
nothing. And then when it started to become time to do more of them, I began to get weirdly fearful of Zoom. So it
Okay.
helps that I know y'all because it's actually a little stressful sometimes. I don't know why.
It
It
can
shouldn't
be.
be.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Ann was at our event on Friday.
Yeah, Jeff was with me.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. So
Lurking.
I mean, things can go wrong, and I can't go to people's
Yeah.
house and help troubleshoot.
yeah.
Like there's some things that you're just like, well,
Yeah.
okay, let's go with it.
I think that Diane Roberts probably has a laptop from the university.
Oh, the event that
And it's
went badly.
probably
Yeah.
12 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did describe it as I think she called it a shitty little laptop is what she called it, right, Whitney?
Well, our wireless, our connection.
Oh yeah, it's the storms.
Oh, wait a
Oh,
second.
And she just
Just-
froze.
Yes.
Yeah, just as she was telling us about her connection, that's creepy.
Maybe she decided she doesn't want to do this.
Kelly, are you
back.
there?
I am.
Said that
I was
at first.
just saying that this is what may happen. I'm gonna go talk to Gavin and maybe see if he will quickly reset. See
Okay.
if that improves things. I'll be
Yeah,
right
just
back.
as you started talking about your connection, you froze on us. So.
Oh, I also
Okay, so it
want
looks
to
like
let you all know that if we lose electricity, I doubt it because it doesn't seem to be like a storm right now, but if we do, I have Zoom on my phone and I can quickly just set it up on my phone because I don't have to have Wi-Fi for my phone to work Zoom.
Okay, great.
We got
So,
it fixed, so
if you disappear, we'll know that you'll.
right, we'll be back.
Okay. Okay.
Just
That sounds good.
Yeah.
act, be nice.
Okay. Okay. All right. So it looks like we're just waiting on Victor then. Okay. So Matt, what can you tell us a couple of your talking points? What do you have a couple of, or do you want to keep them a surprise?
Yes, I'm going to drop them on you in great. No, so my thought was to start out with two questions for Jeff and Ann that are real softballs, just, what's the purpose and design of the big book and what's been your favorite surprise within it. so that you two can sort of get the basic ideas of the book out there and all, and then move to the panelists. I've got just a few questions there that we can move through, whoever wants to address them. Again, on surprises, things that you're like psyched by that story or that person in the book. A question.
Have you gotten the book yet?
That,
Okay.
you haven't, that's helpful to know too.
I have been perusing the store copy.
Because some people got it like right away, and then other people, people far away
I
got it
gave
right
them
away.
The whole list at one time.
I'm so sorry. It's but the
We-
warehouses seem obviously for. Oh, good, you have it.
I bought it.
No,
Yeah.
saved receipts.
We actually did that at first too because our copies were so late in coming. So, hey,
Hi, Victor.
how you
Hey,
doing?
how's it going?
I'm gonna unmute you, Victor. There you go.
Buddy, sorry.
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, good.
Welcome.
Hanging in there.
Thank you. Yeah. That's right.
Good.
I am really short. I'm actually sitting on a pillow, and I'm still. I'm on a pillow.
I feel very huge right now.
Ew.
Feels great.
But I'm sitting closer to the
I
camera.
like the
I think, but
background.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have grown 6 feet while in quarantine. No.
Yeah.
So Matt, you were did you go through the talking
Oh yeah,
point?
and Kelly, have you been able to see at least the table of contents?
Yeah, so I've been looking on and off through a copy we have on hold for a customer.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, no, I've been slowly reading it.
Let's see. Then I've had another question just on sort of anthologies, because you all have, the neat thing about this panel is that everybody here has been involved in some extent or another as an editor of an anthology, or a lot more than one. So I have a question just about anthologies, and then a question on helping readers get into a book of this size, and working through like stories that may be really challenging to them in some way or another. So that's what I got. And I also figured, we can also just leave it open to lots of conversation between you all, because that would be neat. And then we have
That's
15
good.
minutes of Q&A at the end. So I'll be trying to monitor the Q&A as well as we're going.
That sounds great to me. Okay.
What time is it anyway?
So Kelly, do you own or work at a bookstore? You mentioned.
Yeah, we have, we took over a very, very small bookstore in East Hampton, Massachusetts,
Okay.
in September.
Oh wow.
Yeah, this is
That's
our
so
best August ever.
Oh, what a year to take on a bookstore. What is the store called?
Book Moon.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
well, that's great.
It's been fun.
Yeah. It's a lot of work. I know
Yeah.
that.
And really
one
weird. Are y'all open at all, or?
We are, yeah, we're open we've got reduced hours, but we're open Tuesday through Saturday for walk-in browsing with masks and, all the stuff in place. And then on Monday afternoons, we have private appointments for people who prefer that. Yeah. What about you?
People,
Curbside pickup. We've tried appointments, and I would like to do that again, but 3 of the people who work at the store would prefer not to, so it'd be on me and
Sure.
trying to figure out how that will go.
Right.
do people wear the mask generally coming in for the walk-in hours? Are they respecting the mask requirement?
Yes. Yeah. Our city commission, our county commission a few weeks ago passed a regulation that if you're indoors in a public space, you have to have a mask on. So now it's a law. Before that, I think Whitney, you know better than me because you were working in the store more than I was. But I think when we first started it, there were people who'd come in without masks, or people who would take their masks off to talk to you, just stuff
Right.
like so.
Counteract the whole point of it. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. Well, it's 7, so we'll go ahead and start broadcasting, and I'll give the welcome, and I'll hand it over to Matt.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. We're excited to be here tonight to celebrate the release of the Big Book of Modern Fantasy, edited by Ann and Jeff VanderMeer. I'm Katie Hotomacki of Midtown Reader, and we are proud to be Ann and Jeff's hometown bookstore here in Tallahassee, Florida. Ann and Jeff are great friends of our store and loyal supporters of independent bookstores, and it's always a pleasure to host them, whether in the store or virtually. So we're really thrilled to be here tonight. Wanted to let you know that you can purchase the Big Book of Modern Fantasy, as well as more titles by all of tonight's distinguished panelists. And we have some very distinguished panelists tonight who we'll talk about in a minute, from Midtown Reader online at midtownreader.com, or you can give us a call, or you can stop in. We're open Tuesday through Saturday and Monday afternoons by appointment. We'll deliver anywhere in Tallahassee, and we'll ship anywhere outside of Tallahassee. So wherever you are, we can get you the books. Ann and Jeff are also happy to sign copies of the Big Book of Modern Fantasy if you would like that. Also wanted to let you know, you should feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions at any time during the event. And at the end, we'll leave a few minutes for some questions for Ann and Jeff and our other panelists. And as I mentioned, joining Ann and Jeff tonight is a rock star panel of modern day fantasy writers, all of whom contributed to the anthology. Those writers are Cherie Renee Thomas, Kelly Link, and Victor Laval. Thanks to each of you for joining us. And here to moderate the panel is Matthew Cheney, a writer and teacher who lives in New Hampshire and who has worked with Ann and Jeff on numerous projects, including the Best American Fantasy series and Wonder Book. For the Big Book of Modern Fantasy, he did much of the research and writing of author biographies and helped wrangle the introduction into shape. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Matt. Thanks for being here tonight.
Great, thank you so much. So our plan tonight is I'm going to introduce each of our panelists and throw some questions at them, and we're going to chat among ourselves for a bit, and then at the end, with about 15 minutes or so, we'll leave time for open questions. So if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A as we go along, and I'll do my best to take a look at that and pull some questions from there. So to begin and tell you a little bit about who is here with us tonight, we have first, as you know, Ann and Jeff VanderMeer, who live in a jungle ravine in the wilds of Tallahassee, Florida, where they serve the whims and needs of a cat named Neo. They have edited numerous anthologies, including The Weird, The Time Traveler's Almanac, The Big Book of Science Fiction, and this book's predecessor, The Big Book of Classic Fantasy. And now going in alphabetical order, we have joining us Victor Laval, who is a writer of novels, stories, and comic books. His first book was a collection of realistic stories, Slapboxing with Jesus, and he has published the novels The Ecstatic, Big Machine, The Devil in Silver, and The Changeling, as well as the anthology A People's Future of the United States, co-edited with John Joseph Adams. His work has covered a wide range of styles and genres, winning him numerous awards, including a Whiting Writers Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Shirley Jackson Award, an American Book Award, and the Key to Southeast Queens. Kelly Link is an American writer, editor, publisher, and bookseller whose short fiction has been collected in Stranger Things Happen, Magic for Beginners, Pretty Monsters, and Get in Trouble. She's won just about every award worth winning, and she and her husband, Gavin Grant, have co-edited a number of anthologies, including multiple volumes of the year's best fantasy and horror, as well as the enduring zine Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet. Cherie Renee Thomas is a writer, editor, and teacher whose important anthologies Dark Matter, A Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora, and Dark Matter, Reading the Bones, each won World Fantasy Awards for Best Anthology in their respective years. Her poetry and stories have been collected in Shotgun Lullabies and Sleeping Under the Tree of Life, which she described in an interview as, quote, a collection of work that is in conversation with ancient deities and new conjurers, history and mythology, urban and rural, the South and the spaces beyond. Thank you all for being here with us. To begin, for Jeff and Ann, a simple question. This isn't just a big book of random fantasy stories. What was your purpose and design with it?
Well, it's really interesting because this has been a project that we have dreamed about doing, talked about doing for a really long time. So when people ask, how long have you been working on this? I can almost say almost 20 years, because it's something that Jeff and I discussed. We wanted to do it. And in the beginning, when we first started talking about a book of fantasy, we were only thinking of one book. But then the more we thought about it and the more we wanted to bring to it, the bigger and bigger and bigger it got. So that's when we realized it was going to have to be at the very least 2 volumes. And that's why we split it into classic and modern. Although looking back, we could even have done more, because fantasy is such a beautiful genre of stories that you can collect from all over. So that's where it came from.
I think you'll find in these volumes the same thing we brought to the other volumes, which is we like to re-examine the evidence. We like to test the canon. We like to, because they're so voluminous, there's not really a sales pressure to get a particular name. And because they're so wide, you're going to have, quote unquote, big names in it anyway, just by default. So it allows us to curate in a way that we wouldn't be able to if it was a much shorter anthology. And so that allows us to do things like repatriate the so-called literary and genre worlds by having authors in there that you wouldn't often necessarily even think of as, say, for example, a fantasy author, but they wrote fantastical fiction, and maybe they wrote realistic fiction as well. But there's stuff in there that's really of use. And one thing that really stuck with me and is actually in the introduction is what happens when you don't repatriate those worlds, which is to say I had the editor of a very large literary publication, national publication, claim that Ital Calvino and Borges were not fantasy, that fantasy was just zombies. And he said it very dismissively. But at the same time, I had a sci-fi editor for a large journal once come up to me and say, why is Borges one of your influences? He's so small press. And so those things strike in my mind about how, every editor has their own biases and has their own potential to be provincial. And so those are the things that we try to work against while creating something that has structure, but in the case of fantasy, like Anne said, is so various that it is more like a treasury than some of our other books. Like the Big Book of Sci-Fi is a little more laser focused because it's a little narrower what you're selecting from.
And we're lucky in having a large number of pages here, because it gives us the opportunity to also reprint longer works. So we can have a 10,000, 15,000 word story in there where we couldn't if we just had an anthology that could only have 20 stories. So we were very lucky to have that too. And we did take advantage of that. There are definitely some longer pieces in there, but then we also have some very short pieces as well to give you that variety of all the different things that fantasy can bring.
You've also got things that are brand new to English too.
Yes, that's really my passion. I really love translated work. I really love to be able to bring that to a wider audience, because when I travel and I see all these wonderful things, I want to be able to read them. And unfortunately, English is my only language. I've been studying French for about 7 years now, and I still cannot, I just cannot. But I'm still studying it because I love it. But I do love the whole idea of reading stories that came from different countries and learning about how they use their own languages and how it informs what those stories are going to be and where they're going to go. And I love that. I love being able to bring that to everybody else so that they can read them too.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a chance, like Vilma Kadlakova, who's in here with Longing for Blood. I only know about her because I failed miserably to translate a piece, working also with a UN translator a while back, but it stuck in my mind how much I loved the work. And so her one story that's translated to English is in this anthology. She's actually a really well-known writer over there. But I would also say that in addition to the translations, I just want to make a note that Dark Matter, the Dark Matter anthologies have been so influential to all of our anthologies and so important to them, and always been acknowledged in the acknowledgements, because they have given back into our anthologies so much that we wouldn't have known about otherwise.
In a book of such scope and size as this one, there must have been lots of surprises along the way for you as readers. Do you have a favorite surprise?
I do have to tell you about this one story, and I want to pronounce the guy's name right. No, here, right here. Okay, so when I was doing classic fantasy, working on that and researching that, I reached out to a good friend of mine, Karen Lord, and asked her about stories from the Caribbean and then writers that I might not know about. And she mentioned to me Edgar Mittelholzer. And I went and I got all his different books that I could find. And unfortunately for Classic, they didn't work because his stuff was published after 1945. So I went back to get those books with the modern, and I came across this story that he had written originally as a children's tale, okay? And it's called Pulwana's Orchid. And I read this story, and I know it's supposed to be a children's tale, but let me tell you, people, that was really more for adults. There's all kinds of stuff in there that you could read. And I was thinking, wow, this is like one of the coolest things I've ever read. And it's about insects and orchids and plants and animals. But he weaves in all these other things into it that I love so much. And I think it's really pertinent to our times, even though that story, I think he published it, I want to say in the late 40s, early 50s. So even though it was that long ago, it's so pertinent today. And that was one of my surprises to find that story. And thank you to Karen Lord for that.
I think one surprise for me, just because I hadn't read it before, is The Gopherwood Box by Abraham. Do you know how to pronounce that?
Suitzeker.
Yeah, I'm just so bad. Sorry.
Yiddish.
But
Yiddish.
Yeah, it's Yiddish. The Gopherwood Box, because it's just what I love about the wildest fantasy stories is if you really look at what's happening in the story, it's just completely batshit. But because there's a good internal logic, you don't really realize as you're reading that everything you're reading is completely batshit and is only working by its own internal logic and not by the world's logic. And this is one of those stories that does that. Another one from the prior volume was Hans My Hedgehog by the Brothers Grimm, which when you really just break down the actual scenes, you realize this is it's ridiculous. So that's one that I like a lot.
Great. Let's open it up to our panelists now. So as you all were looking through the book, I'm sure there are lots of surprises for you as well. I wonder if there's anything here that when you looked at the table of contents, though, you thought, oh, I am so psyched to see that person or that story in this book. Anybody want to tackle that?
So many people.
Yes.
It's so many. Actually, I didn't even have to open the book. It was the cover. I looked on the cover and I said, "Wah!" It ran down the hall. I was like going nuts. But yeah, it's I will say one of my favorites just personally was Henry Dumas, Ark of Bones. I just really love his writing. I love his poetry. I love his stories. I love that he performed with Sun Ra. And that he's from, the South, and he just has this way of telling stories that makes you feel like you stepped through a door. And it was very cool to see his name in the book and to see that particular story with Head Eye and the strange, ship that appears in the neighborhood. So that was really cool. Yeah.
I think the first thing that I read, I usually will read a collection or an anthology straight through, but I was looking through this and I saw that it has the Margaret St. Clair story, The Man Who Sold Rope to the Knolls, which I think I read for the first time when I was a kid in an Alfred Hitchcock Presents anthology with a great cover. And I love that story. And it taught me a very valuable lesson, which was that if I were ever going to sell rope to the Knolls, I should not ask for an eye in payment. I took that very seriously. I note to self, do not ask for eye. Be satisfied with an emerald.
And for me, on top of the Henry Dumas, one that really jumped out was Michael Moorcock. I came to fantasy very early, then gave it up for horror, and then came back to it again. And there was just an old school childish rush of joy to see Moorcock on top of everybody else, but Moorcock and Dumas, just to start with those, and Angela Carter, just even those three people sort of in one book, that's a good part. It's
such a wonderful mix. edited anthologies, and so you're familiar with the joys and the frustrations of that work. And there's a long history of anthologies, including some of your own, doing really important work within the fields of science fiction and fantasy in particular. And I wonder your thoughts as an anthologist about this book, about its relationship to other anthologies, or its place in the grand anthological ecosphere, or anything you thought when you looked at it, you know, having experienced yourself with this sort of thing.
Well, I will say for me, so I helped, along with John Joseph Adams, as you said, edit People's Future of the United States. Sorry, messed that up. But one of the things that to think about what Anne was saying just a minute ago, this idea of like how this book could, this series could have been multiple series, right? Like just the idea of how you have to sort of make choices.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that seems silly, but like the sort of sweat and pain that goes into making choices that like even I think back on our anthology, and every time I pick it up, there are at least two stories by phenomenally talented writers that in the end, it just didn't work out that it would work for the book. And every time I like have some occasion to pick up our anthology and look at it, I'm regularly like, oh, their stories are in there, right? Like it's kind of like a phantom limb sort of effect. And it secretly in my head, it's an even bigger anthology than the one that actually got published. You know? And it can always be a bigger anthology, is kind of my feeling.
It's true. At a certain point, though, you have to stop, though.
Yes.
Well,
yes,
no, I
you do.
mean, we did sneak 250,000 more words into the weird than our editor was expecting. But.
Right. And we kind of, when we did the
Anyway.
big book of science fiction, we actually squeezed in more than, I just sent him the stories. I didn't tell him what the word count was. I didn't tell him the page count or anything like that. I just did it. And so they learned their lesson after the fiction. So with classic, they said, this is it. Our production department can't do more than this. So that's it.
I do every time that I pick up the weird. I think I need to be stronger. I need more arm muscle to appropriately read this the right way.
Oh, it almost got canceled a couple of times. Yeah.
Oh, God, it's so good. Well, I think both with that and also with this, part of what I think is just, oh my God, this is going to be a fantastic book. One, for presence, but two, to teach with.
Yeah.
There's just so much in here, which is how I feel about anthologies generally, but especially a really big one like this. And then I think if you've done any kind of editorial work, then one of the other pleasures is recognizing the stuff that you do know and love, and then finding new stories that or writers that you don't know at all, which y'all do consistently. And then the third pleasure is just, and I mean this without any sort of judgment at all, is the pleasure of when you come across the writers thinking, if I were doing a project like this, which story would I have picked by this writer?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you do that anyway when you're putting together an anthology, but also as a reader, it makes you think of that writer's body of work, and maybe you think of other stories that you also love, and then you go back to them and you read them. So it opens up a lot of doors. But there's that pleasure in which, like you were saying, Victor, of the alternate anthology, in which you're like, you think, yes, all of this, but like, what are the tiny changes that, you know, if I were constructing my own castle of stories that I would make. And so there's a dialogue going on, which feels like a really creative kind of place to be, fruitful.
For me, I agree. It's a wonderful book to teach from because you can go in so many different directions. If you want to go into dark fantasy, there are really scary pieces in there. If you want to do some kind of slipstream, work, it's in there. And then the very classic kind of fantasy world building things are in there. And like this is something you would definitely put in a literature class, and you could just go straight through it, and not be worried for the semester. I think the other lovely thing about it is the global perspective that you all put on it. we're, you know, right now we were stuck in, you know, quarantine and we couldn't travel very much. But if you had a book like this, you would feel like you've got a chance to, you know, explore the world a bit, you know, places that you might not have gone on your own in your imagination. So I love that you have people like Amos Tudola and Ben Okri in here, you know, and from them, and then we can go to Colombia or, you know, just all over. And that's a real joy, I think, of exploring anthologies anyway, as a reader in particular. I don't read them from straight throughs. I'm going to skip around and go by the names and the stories and, you know, and see, you know, what hits me. But being able to know that I'm not going to be stuck in one aesthetic, you know, or one rhythm of storytelling, that's pretty exciting.
Jeff and Ann, I've been thinking, you know, you've been doing a number of these gigantic anthologies now, and which a lot of editors would never even touch because they're sane. I wonder has anything gotten easier? These are just so difficult to put together. Has there anything that over experience that you've learned doing these?
Well, the only thing I can say that's gotten easier is the permissions process, only because I now have a lot more contacts and know a lot more people and know who to go to get this or that or the other. And that's been very, very helpful. I mean, when you've done this a number of years and you've worked with a number of people and you've, you know, met people along the way and had someone who could introduce you to someone else, that's been very, very helpful, because I tell you, one of the it's almost like a treasure hunt in a way when you find a story that you absolutely love and you want to be able to find where the estate is and how you can get the permissions for it. That's almost its own journey itself, just trying to figure that out. Now, there are a handful of stories that I desperately wanted for this anthology. Jeff and I both did. And we tried all different kinds of ways to get a hold of the estate so that we could get permissions. And alas, some of those stories we weren't able to find permissions for. So that's always a frustration for me, but it is a lot easier now, because I know if I want to, if there's a particular writer that I've published several times, I know who the agent is, who the estate is, the grandson or whoever, or maybe I'm going to a publisher or some other representative. So that part has been a lot easier. And that's great, because that's the hardest part of all these projects, is permissions.
Yeah, I mean, at one point we couldn't get hold of Leonora Carrington, and so we had a friend in the Mexican circus who had a horse and was in the Yucatan, and we did have this idea in our head that we were going to ask this person if they would ride down the coast to her house with a contract. So you get very obsessive about, you want that damn story. And I think one of our regrets for this anthology is, was it Charles Saunders? Charles Saunders. We just could not get permission for a story. And we still, honestly, I'm not quite sure why. but there's an author who definitely deserves to be in anthologies like this. And so, like Victor was saying, you look at the anthology and you see things that that aren't there that should be there. But at the same time, there's a certain freedom after you do a few of these. The thing that gets easier is you realize they're all imperfect. You read a prior anthology and you realize, oh, everybody in there that this guy says is classic were just the guys he drank with. And so the bar sometimes feels low enough in a weird way, even though there's also really great ones like the Blackwater ones that you know you can't get it right. You can't get it perfect. And that allows you the freedom to push a little further than you might otherwise. And hopefully get somewhere interesting. So as soon as you realize that there's just no perfect anthology out there, that's what made it easier for me.
But you know, it doesn't really matter to me if somebody says, well, I wish you had done this story or that writer or this. That doesn't bother me, because just the fact that this book made them think of that writer or that story, to me, that's a plus. Because there's no way you're going to be able to please anyone. But here's the thing that I really love is that I am hopeful that the work that Jeff and I have done over these years is going to inspire and spur on the next generation of editors, because we really need the next generation of editors to pick up that mantle and take this into the future. I mean, we've done this much, but they need to take it further.
So to our panelists again, in a book of this size and scope, there are going to be stories that are challenging for really just about any reader for one reason or another, because there's just so much there. The form could be estranging, the cultural context it's part of might be unfamiliar, or it might challenge your sense of morality or of even reality in a fantasy book. So I wonder if you have any advice for readers when they get to stories that aren't immediately what they might think of as their cup of tea.
I do think about this a lot because short stories are my favorite thing in the world. And so, you know, when you put together an anthology, it depends on what the constraints are. Are you doing it in, you know, historical order? How are you framing it in the introduction? But what I have ended up deciding for myself as a reader, but also as somebody who puts collections together, especially, is I don't care if somebody doesn't like something. I just hope it lingers with them. And so I would imagine that as you read this, it's inevitable that some stories are not going to stick this time, but that's kind of exciting because it means that next time that you come back to read the anthology again, you're going to be a slightly different reader. And so that story may land for you. But also if there's stories in there that you are not comfortable with, that's great. It means that they are going to stick with you longer. You are going to think about them. They're going to unsettle you. And if you have sort of if you were in a place where being unsettled or sort of having an argument with a short story is energy that you can sort of invest, it's a great thing to do, to pick a fight with a short story.
That's great.
I would throw out there just maybe two things. The first is that, like, if I pick up an anthology, any anthology, right? One of the things I try to say to myself, especially when it's something that, if it's got a few stories or hell, even like a bunch of stories that I don't really care for, I do try to tell myself, particularly if I have some faith in who I know the editors are, like, just as a blanket thing, is like they didn't pick this because they thought it sucked, and therefore they want to stick it to me, right? Which is sometimes how I feel in my first moment when I really dislike a thing. But I try to say to myself, like, they picked this for a reason. In the end, it may turn out I'll never really feel it, but I have faith in these people who made this choice, and every choice they made was because they thought there's something special in every single one of these stories. You know, any anthology worth its weight, the editors felt like there's no, you know, the point is never filler, it's all killer, as the saying goes, right? And then the second thing I try to say to myself, in general, I'm really reluctant to get rid of books, right? Partly because, and we live in an apartment in New York City, so we don't have much space. But I've so regularly had the occasion of, like, picking up a book, really disliking that book. 5 years later, I pick up that book. Sort of what Kelly's saying. To that same point. And it has opened up something. I've come into a different sort of personhood myself, where I've had an experience now that unlocks that book in a way that I could not understand it before. And the great thing about an anthology is it's just a story. So you don't got to worry about throwing out a whole book. You know what I mean? You just say, like, I pack away some of these stories for some point later, and maybe someday I sort of walk into the kind of person or experience or wisdom that opens that to me, you know. And it can take, just hold on to the book, because sometimes it can take 5 years, 10 years, but so what? The book is there, you take it down, you fall in love with another part of it.
Picking up on something Kelly said, I wonder, what's the attraction of short stories for you all as writers and as readers?
I think it's the most perfect storytelling form. Beyond a poem, I think it's the most perfect because of, you know, a really good one. You can get into a world, you can slide into another space, and they give you just enough detail and characterization and intrigue for you to really step around and feel the energy of that space. And once you come out of it, maybe you maybe the way you think has changed just a little bit, slightly. You know, they've done this kind of weird alchemy with the storytelling, and they have to do it in a certain amount of time. You know, it's supposed to be one sitting, right? Whereas I also feel like for short stories, readers are less forgiving perhaps than they are for novels. I mean, I have a few novels of works that I like, but I didn't like the entire experience of reading the novel, you know, but I didn't go throw the novel away or completely stop reading it. I suffered through a character maybe doesn't resonate as much for me, or some, you know, long trip parts that didn't really, really move the story along, but because the other parts of it were amazing, you know what I mean? That's, as Kelly said, that's what lingers. You know, the good stuff lingers more. And so I consider that novel, even though it wasn't like a perfect ride for me, the whole from cover to cover, it was a really good story. You know what I mean? With parts that I will always remember. I will forget the bad parts and remember the good. I think it's different for short stories. Maybe not, but it's a lot more, it seems to be a lot more at stake, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say that Victor's story in this anthology, we originally were considering for an earlier anthology. And it just, what happened with that earlier anthology is just that the stories, other stories we were able to get, the conversation wasn't quite right. But I remembered this story over many years. I remembered not just the events, but there was a mood and an atmosphere to the story that absolutely stuck with me. And I found myself thinking about the story at various times when we were putting together other anthologies. And then finally there was this opportunity where it worked with everything else that we were doing. And so I was really happy to put it in there. But it was fascinating to me how I could read this thing that we weren't able to use, that I really loved, but then that it was almost the music of the story or something there that stuck with me. It was something that wasn't even the words after a while, because after a while you forget some of the words, but there was this atmosphere that stuck with me.
I feel like in short fiction, the use of language is so beautiful and so exact in defining of what the story is, where in a novel, you have so much space that the style that it's written in isn't nearly as important as it is in a short piece. So the beauty of a short story to me is in the music of it, the language of it, and not just the story that sticks with you. So that's why I love short fiction so much.
And even after reading all of these thousands of stories to put together your giant books, you still like short fiction.
Yes, I do, and I'm still reading it.
She does.
I actually buy short story collections and read them. And I'm reading, I read short fiction for Tor.com, and, I still do it.
I think it's weird because you put this together, you think you know the stories, but then if you've done a good job, first of all, you've read some stories so much that you really can't read them again. But then there are other ones that seem completely different from what you remember when you were putting the anthology together, and usually in a really good way. So there is some real value in coming to it then in the printed form, and how that somehow transforms it. And then that helps refresh, and you leave aside the long travel bits that Cherie was talking about from that novel when it comes to doing the anthologies. But I don't know, but yeah, that would be it. So.
Soon we're going to bring in some questions from our viewers out there. So I just want to remind folks to use the Q&A function here. You can submit some questions. We've got a few there already. It would be great to get some more going so we can see what you all would like to talk about. I think I'll finish up my questions for you all with one that one of our readers actually predicted that I had, which is, what do you think of the future of fantasy fiction, or what would you like for the future of fantasy fiction, and particularly the future of the fantasy short story? What would you like to see in the future now?
Well, I would say to personally, like to Jeff's point earlier about like the siloing of different sort of perspectives, whether it's sci-fi, literary realism, fantasy, whatever you want to call it. I could be wrong, but I feel as though there's like a I would never say it's the first time, but a resurgence of people having even less respect for those boundaries. And then I think the important thing is readers, there being readers who want that kind of lack of boundaries between things, so that something is, I don't know, it's a military sci-fi romance dragon tale, and everybody just says like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I wanted. And feeling like that in the like more recent years, I've been feeling more and more of that cross-pollinization coming back. Definitely, again, not for the first time, but coming back and readers being like embracing that in a way that has felt like so exciting. You know, it's great when you can create things that are, hopefully are interesting and unique, but it's even better when you can be in a conversation with other readers and writers about those unique things you're all making. So I would just hope that that conduit continues for the foreseeable future.
I would like to see even more embracing of international fiction. I would like to see all of those walls come down between the different countries and cultures, where it's just good stories that we all want to read and share with each other and talk about. I remember years ago when my daughter was pregnant with her first child, and Jeff and I were traveling through Europe. I think we did seven countries in 6 weeks. And I decided that for a baby shower gift, every single country that we went to, I was going to find the quintessential children's book in that language of that country for my grandson. And so every country we went to, we were, you know, hosted by different people in the different countries we went to. I would ask them, what is the children's book of your country? And so we went to all different, and I had this whole collection of books. And incidentally, that's how I was introduced to Moomins when we got to Finland, which was the last country. And that's how I was able to get Tove Jansson in this book, through those connections. But anyway, at the baby shower, after we came back from our trip, I was able to give my daughter a library of books, all in different languages from all these different countries we went to start my grandson off, because that's what I want for the next generation. I want them not to say, well, this is from this place and this is from that place, but just here's all these great stories. Let's just read all these great stories. Now, of course, my grandson can't read all those languages yet, but he's getting there. But, you know, wouldn't it be great if you're just reading all these different stories? It doesn't matter where it comes from. You just know it's a great story. That's what I want for the future of fantasy.
I think I want short story writers to be able to make a living writing
Yes.
stories.
Yeah.
And not get pressure into writing novels if that's not their natural live for storytelling. I would love for the larger audience to be as excited about short fiction collections and anthologies as they are as standalone novels. That would be amazing. I know that's an alternate reality, but that would be cool. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just really want more stories written by the writers that I already love a lot. More short fiction written by people I don't know, and more ghost stories.
Oh yeah.
I still want more ghost stories.
I always just really like unique individual voices, and I really appreciated all 3 stories from all 3 writers on this panel, because they gave me that unique thing that no one else could give me. And so I don't really know that I think so much about the future so much as I look forward to the anticipation of that unexpected moment where a writer makes me come to them, so to speak. Not that they reinforce something I already know, but they surprise me and they make me live in their world, so to speak. And so that's what I really look for.
We've got a bunch of really great questions coming up in the Q&A, so I would like to get to those. And bear with me as I scroll through these a little bit. I think I'll go to one from Corey, just picking up on this same conversation, which is conversely, Are there any trends in fantasy that you wish people would retire? Anything you'd like to see less of that you're willing to talk about in public?
I would just say that's a hard one, because there's things that are not useful to me that are useful to other people, and I see how they are, right? So it's like hard to say we tire this. There are certainly tired tropes or problematic things in the past I prefer never to see again.
I would, I don't know if, is this only fantasy? I don't know. But certainly I would love to see secondary characters, especially secondary characters who are not like the straightforward white usual people whose main purpose in life is not simply to make sure that that main character gets everything they want as soon as they can, and they'll even die so that they can get it. You know, I really want one of those characters to occasionally, when they say like, we've got to do this blood ritual, one of us is gonna die, and then that best friend side character just goes, it's not gonna be me. I just want them to say that once, and they got to do something else. So.
We've got a few questions from people asking about writing in these times, in the times of COVID particularly. So I think I'll just put it out to all of you. How are you doing?
Shitty.
It's been hard. It's been hard. I've had to wean myself off the news. I have to get off Twitter at certain hours of the day. I call it the outrage hour. You know, like clockwork, something ridiculous is going to be trending that's going to break your heart. So it's just kind of going in and out of pockets of optimism and hope, and moments of anxiety and concern and fear. So trying to write through that has been interesting, and keeping the spell unbroken has been something else this summer, the spring, the summer, going into fall. Yeah.
No, I remember reading a really good conversation between it was Cheryl Strayed and George Saunders, I think, talking. And one of the points, and it was there was this question, and this was maybe, I want to say 2-3 months ago, right? So depending on where you live, either here in New York, we were right in the middle of some stuff. Other parts of the country hadn't quite hit yet, isn't quite there yet, all this. But the question came up about, like, how do you write during all this? And I really like George Saunders said something along the lines of, like, when you're falling off a horse, you don't take notes, right? But after you land and you roll and you realize you're not dead or nothing's broken, then you can kind of think about what happened and how it happened and why, right? And that one of the real dangers, I think he was sort of noticing, was that, like, in the middle of all this, there can be maybe some pressure, like, I got to figure out a way to write about this, or I got to talk about this time now and get it all down. And that I can't think of anything that would be more debilitating to me than to, like, getting a little time in, a couple sentences, a paragraph about something. I promise you, like, the thing I'm working on takes place in 1915, and I'm very happy that it's far, far from here. And even then, it's like a couple sentences, you know, or a paragraph. And I feel like in this time period, I'm still tucking and rolling, as is maybe the whole world, certainly our country, and falling off that horse. And I felt relieved kind of when I got that analogy, because I was like, oh yeah, right, I'm being too hard on myself. I just got to not break it.
Yeah, the way I work, I know that if I try to process something too quickly, it comes out like crap. So because of that, I haven't even tried in that respect. But I have to just get used to this idea of being frozen for a while, then unfreezing, and getting used to the rhythm of that. So it's changed the rhythm of how I write, because I know something is going to completely F me up every day, right? And the only thing I did is try to use some of that, because I was working on the third part of this novel I just finished, where the character's becoming more and more isolated. And so I try to just method act to like channel that. And I think it works, but it wasn't ideal because it meant I was continually in that same space. Even when I was writing, I wasn't getting any escape from it. So I was going a little bit nuts to the point where, you know, I talked to the rabbit in the yard and I wasn't concerned about the fact that the conversations were getting longer. But when I realized that there were actually 3 rabbits in the yard that I had mistaken for the same rabbit, that's when I began to think that things were unraveling. So I now kind of monitor myself a little bit. You know, I mean, I feel like there could be this point at which things are not healthy. You know?
We had some requests for a little bit more clarification from Jeff and Ann. Did you send the horse with the contract to Leonora Carrington?
No, we did ask the person in question if they would do that.
And they were willing to.
And they were, and that's why we asked, because we knew to them it would be fun.
She is a good friend of ours and is willing to do whatever for, you know, a cause.
But we didn't think at the end of the day that when thinking of Leonora Carrington's state of mind upon seeing a horse, and that it might possibly be illegal. So, I mean, I was trying to use that as an example of like how, again, you can kind of, especially with that first anthology where people were telling us things like, oh, we can't give you those rights. The woman who owns those rights is in a coma until she dies or wakes up. We can't do that. Or we were explaining ebook rights to monks on an island. Or we were trying to get a Gabriel Garcia Marquez story, and the ebook rights were owned by a Dutch film company that wanted 60,000 pounds for the ebook rights. So it's like you begin, on that book especially, I feel like the weird was beginning to infiltrate us quite a bit. So that was, I don't think we ever would have gone through with it because it was, I think, very, it would have imposed on Carrington in a way that would make us look like very unprofessional, let's put it that way.
We should point out that it all worked out okay because you did get a Leonora Carrington image.
Right, ultimately we got a cover too.
I'm very good friends with the person that is in charge of her estate. We correspond all the time. He's wonderful to work with, so yay, yay.
A great question from Genevieve here. What are some of your favorite venues for reading short fiction right now?
You mean like my living room?
Yeah, no, venues, places that you're finding.
I have a great chair, Matt.
I know you do. Where are you finding great short fiction now, aside from Tor.com, which you are an editor for, Anne?
Oh, gosh.
All I would say is I don't really read a lot of short fiction outside of outside of the anthologies, or if I do, it's totally different. So I will mostly be picking up single author collections of non-fantastical fiction. That's really what I would be doing, like Otessa Moshfegh or something like that, because there's just too much of the other stuff. But I don't really read the magazines. I just haven't had the time because of the anthologies.
I've actually been picking up short story collections. Like Lydia Yuknovich has a new short story collection out. I haven't started it yet, but I did get it at Midtown Reader. I also recently finished the new uncollected short stories of Zora Neale Hurston, which I really loved. And so I guess for me, I've been getting them more from collections and rather than getting them from online, because I'm still reading submissions that come in. So I'm reading short fiction that hasn't yet been published. So I guess I have to make kind of a difference there when I'm reading for work and when I'm reading for pleasure. So I guess in book form.
Sorry, Victor, go ahead.
Nightmare Magazine and The Dark, they both do more like a horror tinged fantasy, and Lightspeed Magazine is like more sci-fi. Those are just 3 off the top of my head that I can think of that I enjoy very much.
I love reading short story collections. I like to collect them like chapbooks. I love the art as well. It's a whole experience. But I read Fire Magazine. I read Strange Horizons. And then I kind of do scattershot through the other ones that I can get to online for free. Yeah.
I So I love the magazine A Public Space, and one story as well, but A Public Space partners with a Japanese translator, Mariki Shibata, who put out a couple of issues of a yearly magazine with A Public Space called Monkey Business. And I believe that they didn't put one out for 1 or 2 years, but there's going to be a new one soon, I think. And that is always, it's always a mix of American writers and Japanese writers. And so in Japan, everything is translated in Japanese. The edition over here is all in English. And that always has a really interesting mix of contemporary fiction by writers that I don't know, as well as a lot of really interesting art or graphic storytelling.
Great. And similarly, we had a number of folks would love to know recommendations for short fiction collections, single author collections that are exciting you these days.
Well, I have a new collection that just came out in May. 9 Bar Blues. Yay! It's stories from an ancient future. I know it's weird, but it's my first all fiction collection because I'm kind of like a hybrid person. So my Aqueduct Press collections were stories and poems. This is from Third Man Books, and it's 16 short stories, all different places, worlds. And I had a ball writing it, and so I would recommend that one totally. Yeah.
I really love a collection called the Trojan War Museum, which came out last year. So it may be due in paperback soon, but it's a mix of the fantastic and more realistic fiction, and it's spectacular.
And I just throw out I am a judge for this year's World Fantasy Awards, so we have in our finalists, along with all the other amazing categories, 5 great collections there that I would urge you to check out. And besides that, one that pops into my mind off the top of my head is called Songs to Sing in the Dark, and I'm trying to remember the math.
Oh,
I'm gonna apologize and get glassy-eyed for a moment and look it up, because I really would love to give this.
Brian, is it
Evanson?
Brian?
no,
Brian?
that's not Traveling of the World. I know the book you're talking about. Shoot.
I think I'm saying that.
You are. No, you're right. That's the title.
You're sending all the booksellers scurrying.
Yeah.
I will also mention we just published a collection. Actually, it's about to come out. That I really, really love, called Dance on Saturday Night by Ellen Cutman. And I am enormously enthusiastic about the stories in that.
Oh, and one other I want to throw out there, I'm sorry, because I am remembering, it's called The Trans-Space Octopus Congregation by a writer named Bogi Takacs. I'm going to mispronounce it, but I got to read that as part of the, you get to see all the collections coming through, and that one really also stayed with me. It's pretty wonderful work.
I haven't read it yet, but I've loved every single story she's ever published. Laura Vandenberg has a new collection out, and I'm really looking forward to it. There's just something about her sensibility that really appeals to me.
Stories to Sing in the Dark is by Matthew Bright.
That's it. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
Matthew Bright. Awesome.
Another wonderful book.
So Andrew has asked Anne and Jeff, were there anything that you disagreed on the inclusion of in the anthology? Would you be willing to talk about?
Spill it.
Very quietly.
Well, there's two different ones, one from classic and one from modern. On modern, I was really enamored of a story that basically tells the tale of this guy who's told about a dragon, and he goes a long way to see the dragon. And it turns out it's just a tourist trap with a lizard in a cave. I thought it was a great anti-dragon story, and Anne was like, there's no fantasy in it. And she's probably right. She's probably right that the reader picking it up would have been like, why the hell is this in here?
Say, I want my money back. No, we didn't publish that one.
And then also before I really had a sense of just Dali as a person and as a writer. I wanted a story from Dali in the classic fantasy, and I skimmed the story, because sometimes I'll go out ahead as like the advanced scout, and I'll skim the stuff and bring back the shiny bauble, and then Anne will reject the shiny bauble
No, let me tell this part. So he said, Anne, I really want a Salvador Dali story in the anthology. This is for classic. I've got to have it. I've got to have it. And of course, I'm thinking the permissions hoops I'm going to have to run through for that. And I was like, okay, whatever. So he finds me a story. He gives it to me, and I read it, and I go, okay, there's 2 problems with this. He goes, what? And he's like, what? Okay, the first problem,
like that.
It's an essay. It's not a story. And number 2, it's an ode to his penis.
No way.
And it was so baroquely written, I couldn't tell either of those things from.
So we didn't publish that either.
Oh dear.
Wow. Okay, so where do we go from there?
Another question.
That would have to be a collection of nonfiction essays that we would get that for. So nonfiction essays about body parts.
The big book of body parts.
You know what? I bet you there's probably a lot of essays written about body parts that we could probably. Okay, I'm not going to go there. No.
Stop.
So, to change the subject, I'm throwing another question at you from our viewers. Speaking of what Victor said about breaking down silos in the genre, do you find that readers are responding to writing that explodes boundaries in a positive way? And are the younger readers or older readers or readers in general, it seems like true fans of fantasy will want to respond to favorably its fluid genre by nature. How are readers receiving this sort of stuff that you all like to do?
Oh, us or
anybody?
Okay,
everyone. I speak for myself. I would really say, like, I wish I could say that it ever fall. I mean, I don't wish I could say it. I'm thankful that to that question, like, is it a younger generation, older generation, anything like that? I find like open-minded readers clearly come in every group, right? As do incredibly hard-headed, sort of single-minded readers. So like sometimes one of the surprises or shocks for me has been sometimes a reader will come up. I mean, back when there were readings and readers could come to you and talk about a thing. And I would be shocked sometimes by like the person who my own stereotype would say, this is my like ideal audience. This is like a person of this age group, this ethnic group, this whatever. They come up to me and they're just sort of like, this was garbage. I just didn't like this at all. And I go, wow, why? You don't have to come tell me. Like, why come to the reading to tell me that? You know? And then on the other end of things, it's like, and then somebody who, again, by my own cliched standards, I would think like that's not the person who's going to get what I'm doing. And they come up and they'd be like, I've read this thing and I love this thing and I understood what was at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. And like that is the amazing thing about writing books. It's like you just don't know whose books match which readers. Like it's one of the great joys I find of like going out in the world or hearing about what your stories or your books might do in the world. Is to discover like your group is so much more surprising and varied than you would ever imagine, or at least me. I won't speak for anybody else. Than I would ever imagine they were, and it's a gift every time.
I think that fantasy is such a broad genre that and fantasy readers sometimes like stuff within a much narrower. Some people have a really strong preference for a particular kind of book, or a particular style of almost how the plot moves. There are people who read for very, very specific things, and sometimes people don't like short stories at all, which is totally fine. You know, do think that in general, because publishers are more willing to publish a broader range of work, including short stories, that it turns out that those readers were probably there all along, but they just did not know that the books were there. They didn't know they liked a particular thing, but the publisher, whether it was because of packaging or because a bookseller put it in their hand, they tried it, they were willing to try it, and they found out they liked it after all. But it's also totally fine when people don't like stuff. I absolutely get the thing where it is terrible to be tagged in a negative review or have somebody show up in a space, whether you're on Facebook or on Twitter or your email box, where somebody felt the need to let you know directly how much they thought something you did sucked. But it's also it can be kind of funny as well. You're like, thank you for putting in all that time. How did you find me? Thank you. But I also think that sometimes readers need permission to pick up a book or to get into a particular kind of genre. And I think that in terms of genre, we live in a much more permissive, sort of genre permissive world than we did when I was a kid. That there's, as y'all were saying, there's more cross-pollination, there's just more traffic between these different circles. And my experience on Twitter is it's a little bit like being at somebody's wedding, in which you have your friends from this area, writers from over here, and there are writers over here, and one day you realize that these writers that you didn't know read each other or even like the same kind of thing are talking to each other, and it's pretty great.
Great. Well, we have unfortunately reached the end of our time. This is a wonderful conversation. Thanks to you all. And I'll now turn it over back to our friends at Midtown Reader.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. I want to echo that. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you for everybody. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And yeah, like I said before, feel free to contact us at Midtown Reader to order the Big Book of Modern Fantasy or any of the collections or works by any of the panelists here tonight. And I hope you all have a great evening. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay. Wait, are we?
We are, let's see, Whitney on the back end is going to go ahead and end it for us. But